I'll never forget the first time I laid eyes on Karen. She was at the local farmer's market, parading around in a bedazzled sun visor, barking out unsolicited advice to vendors like it was her God-given right. "These carrots should be straighter," she'd declare to the farmer who had been growing them for decades. "That honey is too sticky," she informed the beekeeper, as if honey could somehow not be sticky. The vendors pretended not to notice, but I've never been the type to keep quiet when something rubs me the wrong way. Back then, I had no idea that this particular brand of condescending sunshine would soon be living right next door to my farm. Or that she would turn into the biggest headache of my life. A few months later, a shiny new HOA subdivision called Willow Crest popped up on the neighboring property, a perfect row of identical beige houses with pristine lawns and identically spaced mailboxes. The kind of place where trimming your hedges an inch too high can get you fined and trash cans left at the curb past 6 p.m. are considered a public scandal. That's when Karen crowned herself Queen of the Homeowners Association. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sure, they had their rules, but my farm had been here for nearly a century, passed down from my granddad. My land was mine. Their bylaws didn't apply to me. Or so I thought. The letter started small. First, a friendly reminder that my barn's color didn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Then, a polite request to mow my fields on a more HOA-friendly schedule. I ignored them. The way I saw it, their little suburban utopia ended at their property line. But Karen? She didn't see property lines. She saw opportunities to expand her reign. One bright Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of car doors slamming. I stepped outside and saw a long line of SUVs and minivans parked along the country road near my pasture. At first, I figured it was a neighborhood garage sale or an open house event. But then I saw them, dozens of people in pastel polo shirts, wicker baskets in hand, setting up an elaborate picnic. Right next to my fence. On my land. I hopped on my John Deere, rolled up the path, and cut the engine. "Can I help you all?" I asked, trying my best to keep the annoyance out of my voice. A woman with perfectly styled blonde curls beamed at me. "Oh, it's so sweet of you to offer," she chirped. "Karen said we could picnic here. It's absolutely picturesque." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Karen said you could?" I repeated, frowning. Because as far as I knew, Karen didn't own a single square inch of my farm. And that was the moment I realized. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was about to become my worst nightmare. I stared at the group of suburbanites spread across my pasture, their pastel picnic blankets laid out like a scene from a magazine ad for overpriced iced tea. A few of them leaned against my fence, snapping pictures of my cows like they were part of a petting zoo. Just then, I saw Karen approaching from the road, her wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over a smug, all-knowing smile. "Good morning, Hank," she called, her voice honey-sweet and twice as fake. "Isn't this just a wonderful day for a community event?" I stepped down from the tractor, jaw tightening. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone steady, "I don't recall giving you permission to hold a jamboree on my land." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We're just enjoying the open space. It's a community gathering, Hank. Isn't it nice to be neighborly?" I inhaled slowly, trying to reel in my temper. Neighborly means asking before you set up camp on someone else's property. Karen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Well, we didn't think you'd mind. After all, you've got so much land. It's not like we're hurting anything." Behind her, a group of kids was dangling a balloon over the fence, taunting my cattle like they were playing a carnival game. I clenched my fists, picturing the disaster waiting to happen if one of those kids got too close. I forced a tight smile. "Karen, I'm asking nicely. Get your people off my land." She let out a dramatic sigh, as if I was the unreasonable one. All right. "We'll pack up," she said, making no effort to hurry. I turned and walked away, knowing full well she'd try this again. And I was right. The following week, another letter from the HOA landed in my mailbox. I opened it, expecting another ridiculous complaint about my barn not being the right shade of beige. But this one nearly made me laugh out loud in disbelief. Per the Willow Crest Homeowners Association Community Enhancement Initiative, we have designated a portion of the land bordering our subdivision as an approved recreational green space. I had to read it twice. They were trying to claim part of my land, my family's land, the land I worked, the land I paid taxes on, as a community park. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a negotiation. It was a statement. Like they thought they could just declare it into existence. The next weekend, I saw them back at it again, this time with a full-blown volleyball net set up right next to the bull enclosure. Enough was enough. I stomped toward Karen, who was standing by a picnic table, sipping lemonade like she was hosting a garden party. "Karen," I said, my voice tight, "you seem to be confused about something. This is my land. Not yours. Not the HOA's. Mine." She smiled, completely unfazed. "Well, Hank, if that's how you feel, you should have come to the community meeting. We all discussed it last week." I let out a bitter chuckle. "That's funny, because I'm not in your community. I don't answer to your HOA. I don't care what was discussed." She pursed her lips like a scolding teacher. "Hank, don't be difficult. We're just trying to beautify the area. By stealing my property?" "Oh, don't be so harsh," she said with a laugh that made my blood boil. "Besides, some of the HOA members were thinking about buying fresh eggs from you. So really, this is good for business." That was it. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor. I was dealing with someone who genuinely believed she had the right to control whatever she laid her eyes on. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Karen, I'll say this once. Stay off my land. If you or anyone from your HOA sets foot here again, I'll take action. And I promise you won't like what that means." Her smirk faltered for just a second before she gave me a little shrug. "All right, Hank. I hear you." But I could tell by the glint in her eye that she wasn't done. And I was right. 2 days later, I woke up to a visit from animal control. A man in a county uniform stood at my fence, clipboard in hand, looking uncomfortably apologetic. "Morning, sir. We received a complaint about your bulls being a public safety hazard." I let out a slow exhale. "Let me guess. Karen?" He shifted, uncomfortable. "I can't say who submitted it, but we got a report that your livestock has been roaming dangerously close to the neighborhood." I motioned to the well-maintained fencing that completely surrounded my pastures. "That's funny, because they've never left this enclosure." The officer nodded, flipping through his paperwork. "Yeah, she sent in some pictures." I grabbed the file and felt my stomach turn. Karen had cropped the photos to make it look like the bulls were loose, when in reality, the fencing was just out of frame. "She doctored these," I growled. He sighed. "Yeah, but complaints add up. Even if you're in compliance, if they file enough reports, the county might have to intervene." I clenched my jaw. Karen wasn't just being a nuisance anymore. She was weaponizing the system against me. She wasn't just trespassing. She was trying to bury me in legal trouble. And that was when I realized, this wasn't going to stop. Not unless I did something about it. The next weekend, I woke up to the sound of car doors slamming and excited chatter, the kind of noise that had become a warning bell ever since Willow Crest HOA moved in next door. I pulled back the curtain and, sure enough, saw a line of minivans and SUVs parked along the road, the usual parade of pastel-wearing suburbanites unloading picnic baskets, lawn chairs, and coolers. But this time, they'd gone bigger. A portable volleyball net was stretched across the edge of my pasture, and a group of grown men in golf shirts were spiking a ball back and forth like they were at a weekend resort. A few kids were dangling pool noodles over my fence, teasing my cows, while others ran between the blankets, shrieking with laughter. And right in the middle of it all, sipping lemonade under a pop-up tent, sat Karen, looking as if she owned the place. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my jaw. If words wouldn't stop them, maybe it was time for a lesson they wouldn't forget. I grabbed my hat, stepped outside, and started walking toward the pasture. Karen spotted me, her smile widening as if she had already won. "Oh, Hank," she called out. "I was wondering when you'd come over." We did remember to ask this time. I stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "You asked, but you didn't wait for an answer." She gave a little shrug, swirling the ice in her drink. "Well, I assumed you wouldn't mind. We're just trying to create a little harmony between our communities." Harmony. That was a word people like Karen loved to throw around when they were about to steamroll right over someone. I glanced past her, my eyes settling on the spot where Thor and Apollo stood in the bull enclosure, watching the commotion with mild curiosity. A plan formed in my mind, slow and steady as a thunderhead rolling in. I gave Karen a tight-lipped smile. "Well, since you're so invested in learning about farm life, I figure it's time you experience it properly." I turned, walked toward the fence, and unlatched the gate to the bull pasture. It took less than 30 seconds for Thor's massive head to lift, nostrils flaring. Apollo followed suit, both of them stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. Karen didn't notice at first. But the others did. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the men in golf shirts froze mid-volleyball serve. A woman near the fence grabbed her purse off the ground, eyeing the bulls with wide eyes. And then Thor let out a low, rumbling grunt, deep, deliberate. Panic hit like a sudden summer downpour. Lawn chairs tipped over. Plates of sandwiches were abandoned. Someone let out a high-pitched shriek as Apollo stomped the ground, kicking up dust. Karen shot to her feet, her lemonade sloshing over the rim. "Hank," she gasped, her voice losing that smug edge for the first time. "You can't be serious." I leaned against the fence, completely calm. "Oh, don't worry," I said. "They're perfectly happy in their space, as long as people respect their boundaries." The bulls stepped closer, hooves pressing into the soft earth. A man in khakis let out a panicked yelp as Thor flicked his tail, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Another woman tried to gather her picnic blanket, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it again. "All right, everyone," Karen called out, her voice wavering. Let's just move back to the cul-de-sac for now." For the first time, she looked nervous. Slowly but surely, the HOA members began backing away. A few broke into a full sprint toward their cars, hauling coolers and folding chairs like rats fleeing a sinking ship. By the time the last SUV door slammed shut, the field was nearly empty. Karen stood there for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. She looked at me, then at the bulls, then back at me. "You," she started, but her voice was shaky. I grinned, tipping my hat. "See? Farm life is full of surprises." Her face burned red, but she didn't argue. She just turned on her heel, storming off toward her car. As the last vehicle pulled away, I let out a low whistle, signaling to Thor and Apollo. They paused, flicked their tails, and strolled lazily back into their pen, as if nothing had happened. I latched the gate behind them, watching as a few plastic cups and abandoned sandwiches fluttered in the wind, the only remnants of Willow Crest's disastrous day at the farm. I had a feeling Karen wasn't done yet. But after today, at least, she'd think twice before treating my land like her personal playground. I knew Karen wouldn't let what happened with the bulls slide. she wasn't the type to admit she was wrong, let alone back down. The question wasn't if she'd retaliate, it was when and how. I got my answer 2 days later when I found another letter from the HOA sitting in my mailbox. At this point, I had received enough of these to expect more petty complaints, maybe something about my aggressive livestock or another absurd demand that I repaint my barn to better complement the neighborhood aesthetic. But when I opened the envelope and read the first few lines, my stomach tightened with anger. Notice of public nuisance complaint, livestock safety violation. I exhaled slowly, reading through the legalese-filled nonsense. According to Karen and her HOA board, my bulls were a danger to the community, and I was being formally ordered to either relocate them to a further section of my land or build an additional reinforced fence between my property and Willow Crest, at my own expense. I snorted. Like hell I would. Karen wasn't just mad, she was using bureaucracy as a weapon. She knew she had no real power over my farm, so now she was trying to bury me in paperwork and force me into compliance through sheer exhaustion. The very next day, 2 men in polished suits pulled up to my farmhouse in a shiny black SUV. They stepped out, adjusting their expensive watches, and walked up to my porch like they were about to sell me a retirement plan. I didn't bother inviting them in. "You lost?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. The taller one, Thomas Aldridge, cleared his throat and gave me a polite, rehearsed smile. "Mr. Dawson, we represent the Willow Crest Homeowners Association in matters relating to community safety and property regulations. We'd like to discuss a potential solution to the ongoing concerns regarding your livestock." I folded my arms. "Go on." He launched into a long-winded speech about community harmony and mutual respect between neighbors before finally getting to the real reason they were here. "We'd like to propose that you move your bulls further from the subdivision or install a reinforced secondary fence for the safety of our residents." I stared at them for a long moment, then let out a short laugh. "You mean you want me to move my bulls, who have lived here longer than any of your residents, because your people can't respect property lines?" Aldrich hesitated. "It's a matter of public safety, Mr. Dawson." I smirked. "Oh? And were you this concerned about safety when your HOA members were climbing my windmill or dangling balloons over my cattle fence? Because that seemed plenty dangerous to me." The shorter man, looking increasingly uncomfortable, cut in. "We'd just like to avoid unnecessary legal disputes." There it was. Karen wasn't just trying to inconvenience me, she was threatening legal action. I shook my head, stepping forward. "Here's my counteroffer, your client and her HOA can stay the hell off my land. And if they really want to push this, I'll see you in court." Aldridge sighed heavily, already sensing they weren't going to get what they wanted. "We'll advise our client," he said, handing me his business card before they turned back to their SUV. I watched them drive off, already knowing this wasn't over. And I was right. The county gets involved. A few days later, I received a notice from the county office. An environmental impact inspection was scheduled for my farm. I read the letter twice, feeling a slow burn of fury build in my chest. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it. She wasn't just trying to get rid of my bulls, she was going after my entire farm. I met with Maggie Harris, the county inspector, when she arrived. She looked tired but fair, like someone who had seen too many pointless complaints. "I take it this is about the HOA next door?" I asked as we walked the property. She sighed. "Let's just say I've seen this pattern before. A new subdivision pops up next to farmland, and suddenly the HOA starts filing complaints: dust pollution, water usage, waste disposal. The usual tricks." I gave her a pointed look. "So you know this is bull ***. She smiled wryly. "I know what they're trying to do, Mr. Dawson. But my job is to follow regulations, not appease HOAs." She did her inspection, checking water usage records, fencing stability, and soil conditions. I had nothing to hide, and she knew it. After an hour, she snapped her clipboard shut. Everything looks fine. I'll be filing my report, and as far as the county is concerned, you're in full compliance. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Appreciate it. She hesitated before speaking again, her tone lowering. Off the record? Be careful. Karen and her HOA aren't done. They might not win this fight, but people like her don't like losing. I nodded. Yeah. I figured as much. Karen's final play, the lawsuit. A week passed. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally accepted defeat. Then, I received a formal notice from the county courthouse. Karen had filed a lawsuit. She was suing me to have my bulls permanently removed, claiming they were a threat to public safety and had traumatized multiple families. I read the ridiculous claims, about how children were now afraid to play outside, and how my reckless disregard for safety was lowering their property values. I let out a slow breath, setting the paper down on the table. Karen wasn't playing fair. She was going for the throat. I grabbed my phone and dialed my lawyer, Dan Mitchell. You were right, I said the moment he answered. She escalated. He sighed. What are we looking at? I told him. He let out a low whistle. All right, Hank. We're gonna hit back. Hard. I leaned against the counter, my jaw tight. Karen thought she could bury me in legal trouble. Thought she could intimidate me into backing down. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The lawsuit was still looming over my head when the fire started. It was late afternoon when I noticed the plume of black smoke rising near the Willow Crest subdivision. My stomach twisted. Out here, a fire could spread faster than a bad rumor, and the dry brush between my property and the HOA was a disaster waiting to happen. I jumped into my truck and sped toward the smoke, heart pounding. As I got closer, I saw a group of HOA residents standing around, staring at the growing flames like they were watching a backyard bonfire. One guy half-heartedly sprayed a garden hose at the flames, but the water barely reached. What the hell happened? I barked, already grabbing the fire extinguisher from my truck. One of the women wrung her hands. We think it was a grill, she stammered. Someone was barbecuing, and the wind. I didn't wait for the rest. I charged forward, emptying the extinguisher at the base of the flames. A couple of panicked HOA members finally sprang into action, grabbing buckets of water, but the fire was still spreading. Just as I was about to run for more supplies, I heard sirens wailing in the distance. The fire department arrived, dousing the flames before they could reach my pastures. The firefighters confirmed what I already knew: the fire started on the HOA side, and it was sheer luck that it hadn't spread to my farm. I turned and found Karen standing at the edge of the crowd, her usual smugness gone. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. For once, she had nothing to say. I took a slow step toward her, dusting soot off my hands. I don't hate you, Karen, I said, my voice level. But you and your HOA need to understand something: this isn't your land. You don't get to control it. And if you keep pushing, one day you're gonna lose more than just a legal battle. She didn't argue. Didn't snap back with some condescending remark. She just nodded. That night, I got a call from my lawyer. Karen had dropped the lawsuit. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe she realized she had pushed too far. Or maybe, just maybe, she finally understood that some lines aren't meant to be crossed. Things haven't exactly been friendly since then, but at least the HOA stays on their side of the fence. My bulls roam undisturbed, my fields remain mine, and my land, **** the land my grandfather worked before me, ***, is still standing. Funny, though. All of this started over nothing more than a picnic. Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen, who thought they ruled the world? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.